Так, ладно, давайте начинать. Всем привет. Меня зовут Женя.
My name is Zhenya. Hi everybody, and I'm a tester. And recently on my working computer I was taking care of the order, and I looked at my very first projects in terms of testing. I felt nostalgic but ashamed of my first project because the code was terrible. And I was thinking how many challenges are there on the tester's way, and I identified top 13 problems that most testers run into, and I will present them as 13 labors, Hercules labors challenge, like Hercules, and one of them is like killing of the Nemean lion, or the first labor. It was the simplest and one of the first labors, and this is part of the code that I found. You don't need to go into it. I will just comment that in red is not a very good practice. I painted in red what was not successful. And step by step, what was wrong? The search for elements were inside the test. All those drive elements should be separate. If some of you have not heard about such a pattern like patch object, I would like you to get familiarized with that, because it proposes tests that will be read like fiction, like by ID, by XPath, everything that should be missing in this test. This is not clear, which means bad was deleted. Thread slips. Who of the present writes code on Java? Okay, excellent. Such people should know what that means. Thread slip, it's like 35,000, and it starts code for 35 seconds, and in this part of the code, slips are for 12 seconds. This is terrible. This is wasted time. This is the thing that everybody uses, but no one wants to admit it. Thread slips is very tricky. And why this is bad? Because time is wasted. And why 2 seconds, why not 500 milliseconds? If it's bad, we delete it. Thirdly, the checkups. Here we have 4 assets. This is bad because it's not clear if the secondary or primary, if those checks are required, or if the secondary or intermediary, it's not clear, then we will delete it. And the fourth, non-informative conclusion of some piece of information. I will try to reproduce my way of thinking when I was writing this test. We first find this element with ID, confirm OK, then we click it, and then wait for 5 seconds, and then we have some copy of user status, and then check how this is correlated, and then we see that printing of company works perfectly. What I meant here in this test, I still don't understand. Although system out print it didn't help me, though its basic idea was to help me out, for me to understand it. One should inform it in a more adequate way compared to what we used before. So we delete it again. Another point, comments. Probably 4 assets were not enough for me. I added 2 more, then I rejected them, and this is just waste which is not required in the test. You should get rid of it in the test as well. And lastly, some analog of the weight, an adequate solution. Most likely once in a second it searches for an element with some kind of ID, and then fails with... the solution is possible, but you'd better use weights. So out of this code, the outcome is that the situation is not very good. And as I mentioned in page objects, and I recommend to use them, because using them, tests can look like that. Approximately, they are not ideal, they can be simpler and better, but at least looking at the names, you can check that login with validation or credentials are checked. Some blocks or parts of the code are here, and at least names of the methods are more or less logical, so one can say that this test is adequate. The maximum or perfect example of the test is something like that. looking at its name, you can check that we check the entrance to the admin panel, and we enter our admin panel, and we check the title, and we see that the test has been successfully completed. As I mentioned, page object makes it possible, like readable and similar to fiction. And if we forget about admin panel name, one can check that we can use login of the user and title, and that's about it. So you don't need to read all those drivers, names, and so on and so forth. There is a principle that was located a long time ago, which says that everything should be simplified and, as long as it is possible. So the main idea of this labor is try to do it like this, so it could be readable, not as I mentioned in the beginning, and the person that will read it will probably speak highly about you.
So the next labor is try to make it necessary, similar to Lernian Hydra, chopping off, and finally he chopped off all the heads and won. So what I'm saying is that you need to test the right stuff. Let's say you are testing an online shop, and you do a shop where you need to check a refrigerator. So you open up a page, you enter a fridge page, select LG, and check the hits. What I found is that sometimes there are checks of this kind. An advertising page opens, search field is highlighted, and these checks are secondary. If you need to make sure that all elements are accounted for on this page, you need to run another test, because under this test it's excessive. And the same applies to secondary tests. I ran across this once, and I found that these guys had a lot of problems of this kind. So we opened the page, tried to locate the brand of refrigerator that we want, and see that it is highlighted in results. We also make sure that privacy policy and refrigerator advertising is there. But the test might fail, and then you will have to struggle with it. You don't need to mix a lot of secondary stuff into one test. Try to discard these Hydra's heads that are completely unnecessary, and then your tests will at least be more stable and readable. So the main idea behind this slide, behind this labor, is try to chop off secondary checks that are unnecessary. The same applies to reliability. Akin to the Erymanthian boar, which Hercules found and tied securely and delivered to his customer, we do the following. The previous presentation mentioned this. What is the underlying idea behind automated testing? This is informing or providing relevant actual information about the product. So these tests need to be reliable, so that whenever it fails or crashes, it means that really something critical has happened. So the main problem, or the main reason here, is waiting. Let's go back to the fridge case. So we open the fridge selection page, we look for our brand and make sure that it is reflected in the results section. Oftentimes, you click search button and your results do not appear immediately on the page. You see that the results take 1 second to pop up, and typically here's your solution. You enter 2-second sleep,
через 2 секунды уж точно будет
which means
все будет в порядке.
some 2 seconds
Чем хуже,
later you will
потому что
have
потерянное время,
your
и
results
через
on
некоторое
the
время этого
page.
слипа не хватит. То есть у вас
What's bad about it is that at some point you might have too many fridges and your time will increase. Once I ran into 60-second sleep, which is completely terrible. But the most complicated thing here is that at some point your developers are going to fix long loading, whereas your testers will still be waiting for the results to come up. So you need to combat this, and one of the solutions is using waiters. They vary from product to product, but this solution is valid. So this waiter takes 5 seconds to look for ID loader, that it is on the page, and then it gets off the page. Loader is a spinner showing that the page is getting loaded. So if under 5 seconds it didn't get loaded, it means there are some problems. Of course, you can control for it, not necessarily 5 seconds, could be 10 or 60. And waiting is just one of the aspects. There are a lot of problems here. And speaking about flakiness of tests, Andrei Sontsev and Artem Yoroshenko elaborate on this substantively. Here the links to those presentations. So try to make sure that reliability is in place. So the fourth labor of Hercules is called separate, similar to Mare's Diomedes, which Hercules basically stole, brought to the customer, and those mares were found to have been eating human flesh. They had to be let go, and they died in the woods, in the mountains. Why do you need to separate? There are a lot of dependencies in tests. Tests may be contingent upon a pre-launch or some pre-class. As an automator, you need to try and fight this. But regardless of your effort, there are some things that you may not even be aware of. One of them came out of the Civilization game. If you played Civilization, how many played it? Great, those who didn't play that game. So this is a step-by-step strategy. You pick a country and you lead it to triumph. This is how it looks now. It used to look much worse. So you pick a country, there is a rule of that country, and you could choose India with Mahatma Gandhi as the ruler. Gandhi is a non-violent proponent of independence. So the creators of the game showed it in his hostility level equal to 1 on a scale of 1 to 10. The problem was that the game developer who did this function introduced a variable which was a symbol-less number, or characterless number. As a result, it led to negative values. So Mahatma Gandhi actually turned or transformed himself into a genocidal maniac and unleashed wars on all his neighbors. The problem was that whenever a democracy was adopted, nuclear weapons could be researched, and actually this meme came out called Mahatma Gandhi. The developer just didn't foresee this, and actually I had come up with a bunch of such dependencies that I found in preparation for this presentation. Bottom line, it's impossible to foresee everything. You should try to make sure that this doesn't happen, particularly to such a reputable person. So the fifth labor, integrate. Like in a Cerberus case, when he was brought to surface, it was found that he had fear of daylight. So I ran parallel to nighttime test launches. One of the principles of auto-testing is that it informs you that your product is okay or not okay. As I told you, we use Jenkins for that. So we set up the system so it runs tests at night. And when we report for work in the morning, we know that the system is okay or not so okay. And there's a cool thing called like cron syntax. If you use it. Once I joined a project with guys doing auto tests, which they launched manually. So auto tests is supposed to be launched automatically. I mean, that's the name of it. I couldn't figure out why they had to be started manually. They can and should be launched automatically. Jenkins use days of week, day of month, hour and minute. You can be very flexible in setting that up. And this is how a script might look. Scripts could be run every hour on the hour. Asterisks indicate that we don't need days of the month and months. And 1 to 5 means they will start from day 1 to day 5. So on working days, from Monday through Friday, from 6 to 17, every hour a test will be launched, indicating or showing that the product is fine or there are some problems with it. All of this is done through reporting with flexible configuration, with various aspects and variants. If you don't want to be worked up about all of this stuff, there are some annotations like midnight, and the launch will occur only at midnight. Like I said, there is a very agile setup. You can fine-tune it even to the third Monday of the month. So the main purpose here is to defer your test to some CI system, rely on CI system. The sixth postulate is inform. Similar to Augean Stable's purge, Hercules came up with a simple plan. He needed to clear the yard of manure, so he pulled down 2 walls, rivers flew through that yard, clearing it out completely. So when you write an auto test, you debug it, and you try to set it up logically, coming up with some variables. When your test is written and you load it on Jenkins, delete unnecessary conclusions. A good practice is to put out justifiable conclusions to a console. Sometimes I saw such things. 517 auto test. What does that mean? I have no idea. So 517, is it an ID on a number of a test? No idea. This is completely uninformative. We will have to dig into the code and decide whether to reboot it and see why it crashed. Again, test package, regression, and Java lang assertion error. What did it check? No idea. What kind of parameters were collated? No idea. It could look like something like that for coincidence test. And these are the lines that you can read that it comes up with. At least this is a valid test with some expected result and an actual result with a false parameter for some reason. In fact, this is a good practice to put out assert comments. If you write a code whose behavior is unclear and chaotic, write some comments, because sometimes you try to find your way around this code and you find some segments or fragments that people sometimes overreaching and comment on things that no comment is required.
When the comment is longer than the code line, and return 1 returns 1. What is the purpose of this comment? If we go back to the comment that I've shown you in the very beginning, at least those are parts of the text which are divided into logical blocks. Let's say they are not really needed, but at least they give understanding what's going on here. Stack Overflow also has lots of comments of people that were trying to somehow communicate to the world about their code. One of them is on the screen now. He dedicates all his work to his wife that has to support him and his dog and 3 children. Probably he was desperate when he was writing this code, and there are lots of situations like that. If some of you are interested in that, the constant 10 equals 10, as if 10 can fluctuate. And this can be fixed later, fixed later. The developer after the weekend found that what was going on and defined true false, like happy debugging or comment. If you make comments, you should make it logical and properly. You shouldn't write things like that. And if you are very happy, you can write something what is needed. The main part of the section inform first of all yourself and in a clear way and communicate. It's a follow-up to the previous slide. Some to belt of Hippolyta because of Hercules and Amazons, because of the improper identification was unleashed, and there was no communication, and they will communicate with the code. It can be done with the voice, and don't feel too shy to communicate with the development team when codes are written, because sometimes you come to work and 10 to 20 tests failed, and sometimes people registered lots of reports about bugs, but when they just launched, it was quite logical that tests could crash and sometimes some kind of deployment or hacker attack. If something is wrong, don't feel too shy. Ask your development team. Probably they will provide you relevant information. Also, QA team communication is also relevant here. If you are in a deadlock or if you see something is wrong with your tests and you don't know how to tackle the situation, don't feel shy. Don't forget to ask your colleagues, and surely they will help you. Also, it's good practice to be guided by the 15-minute rule. If you can find a solution to a question in 15 minutes time with Google, sometimes it's worthwhile to ask questions. No matter what you do, the same thing, and don't feel shy. Communicate. Sometimes people forget about this very successful practice. Delegation is the same. In parallel, like apples of the Hesperides, it was very explicit. Hercules capped to the sky instead of Hesperides, and they gave apples to him instead. And once there was a situation, there was a typical registration, and one had to fill out the registration form on our website. Then a letter came, and you were supposed to confirm that it was a unique email, and then to use the system. And as regards our product, the situation, everything was smooth. So the problems occurred where I used Gmail. On Google, I could have no impact on that, and my letters either got to spam or didn't reach me, or there were some modalities in terms of information. There were lots of problems, lots of challenges, and I was new novice tester, and I asked developers. Let's say I complained and went to have lunch, and one of our developers said that I did everything for you in 20 minutes. There's a part of the code, and you will add access to your email, and just this part of the code takes your last letter from your inbox, and the code is very long. It's just a part of this code on the screen. And if any of you have a problem in terms of registration where uniqueness of the is is required, and if you have a similar problem in a GAP, you can ask me and I will help you out to resolve this problem. This as regards delegation, you can shift your task to other people. Probably it will take them just 20 minutes and more time, or you will spend much more time. Also actualize your tests, like cattle of Geryon labor, when Geryon was bringing cows to Hercules, goddess Gera was unhappy, and all those cows ran away, and it was a problem. And when we write tests, let's say Jenkins systems, and those tests are like that. You see sun signs, everything is performed properly, everything is fine. And at some point, the first test crashed. And from here, two types of scenarios are possible. First of all, you are like a tester, are trying to figure out the reasons and how to debug, how to improve the situation. The second scenario, probably most likely there are some manual tasks for you, and this task is delayed until tomorrow, then until the day after tomorrow, and so on and so forth. In 2 weeks, the situation looks like that. Some tests have already been crashed, and lots of time is required for actualization. What has been actualized in each test, and so on and so forth. Two scenarios again: either you are able to debug that, or in some time, if you're unable to do that, your tests look like that. Those are actual screenshots from my practice. The tests are gray now. Some were fulfilled or executed 4 months ago or 2 months ago, and so on. And one can say that the situation for the product looks like the screen, or similarly you have automation, but how many? 5 were launched during the last months. Looks like everything is fine, but please don't bring your situation in testing on your product when you will need like Hercules to run all over the fields, trying to catch all those mad cows. And provide testing when everything is nice, everything is in good condition. When you know that your auto tests provide the main tests and function, proving that everything is fine, start writing tests ASAP. This is Kyrenian hind, and Hercules was catching it for a year. Then he shot an arrow and brought it. And how it works in practice. Once I interacted with one of my colleagues with regard to framework. We met each other at one of the conferences. I asked, what do you deal with? And I said, cool. And what about auto tests? He said, it's fine, and we write them from the very beginning. And he said, framework is almost ready. We provided page objects and architecture. How long have you been building it? 1 year. How many tests do you have? We have framework. I didn't get the situation. Why do you need framework if there are no tests? Probably it's a perfectionist. This is good practice to do everything perfectly from the very beginning and very qualitatively. But when framework is being written, the tests in our case work bad, but at least they have shown something. And in the book of achieving a high level of mastery in complex types activity impossible without a certain amount of practice. This is a rule of 10,000 hours, and it's difficult to achieve high level of mastery in tests, but if you haven't written framework. So don't try to do everything very well and from the very beginning. This is almost impossible. Or try to write tests from as soon as possible. As regards review, Stymphalon birds, Hercules defeated them with the arch that goddess Athena gave to him. And it so happened that we are mostly interested in the use of the proper instrument or tool in good arms. And it so happened that we were testing some product and we use soap UI, and there is a regular expression. If we talk in specific terms, the phone number is registered somewhere, and it can be with the city code or not. And if the first symbol is parenthesis and then three symbols are digits, it's like if in the test. This is not an ideal situation. I was trying to figure out what SOAP UI means, and I found the stick mark that can be used in tests. Do you know what it means, regular expression? Oh, the majority, that's cool. And then it will be much easier for you to understand it. To spend a couple of days in Google, and there's one line which resolves the majority of the problems, and the first two options will be suitable, then two more options will not be suitable, and then there is a phrase that I looked at the problem and thought, let me memorize it. If I look at the problem and I think a regular expression can be applied, then you have two problems. But in this case, it resolves the problems, and proper use of the proper tool is very useful. Sometimes you don't need to get familiarized with very cool tools like Geometer, but this happened occasionally. And there is such a program which checks for failed references on the site, and it burdens the system. And we asked our tester to check for those failed links. It was not very good, but that was what happened, and we realized that we had a tool which helps us to check the burden in terms of testing. It was not required to learn something large scale. So look at your tools, whether you use the correct, proper things. And actually our 12th labor, develop yourself, develop others, in an analogy with Cretan bull, when it was delivered, sea was crossed, according to the legend, and when it was brought to the customer, according to the legend, Olympic Games were launched. It's like they became stronger when crossing the sea. So the postulate is after you feel that you become strong and powerful, or a set of knowledge shared with your colleagues or counterparts, and there is a saying, if you are trying to figure out something, ideally try to explain it to somebody who doesn't understand it, and it will help you to figure out what your weaknesses are. And the third labor, enjoy. Let's put it like this. There were two stories, according to the legend. Tsar Hesperides had 50 Hesperian king, or had 50 daughters, and he wanted all of them to have a child from Hercules, and he spent 50 nights, according to one night, and each of them spent one night with Hercules, and another source that it says that 50 daughters spent a night with Hercules during one night. And the idea is enjoy the process as if that happened in reality. And this is like a summary of what we have discussed today, and thank you for your attention. Thank you very much for your report. Any questions? К сожалению, я его не слышу. Better? A question about frameworks. It's clear that to spend 1 year for preparing a framework is not very best practice, but nonetheless we cannot start developing tests from zero. There's no background. We still need to spend some time for framework, at least some time, not too much, and then using this step by step and so on. So the problem is that sometimes people as if like have a bulb, like I can do it better, even better, and on the fourth iteration it will be ideal, and then framework is like disassembled. How can one find a balance between what could be wonderful, ideal, perfect to be programmed in framework and later on just to invoke a procedure, do it well, and between the fact that we write tests without any frameworks, but let's say just like that, it's not clear. I understood your question. Look, there is a wonderful principle which is often cited like 80, Pareto theorem, 80/20, and exactly the same. Either you have lots of time, either for tests or framework, and also divide it percentage-wise, 80 tests and 20 framework, or vice versa, 80 framework and then again 20 for framework. It can be also like that. But I would recommend to concentrate on writing, first of all, tests, and then later on refacts, and to add some methods and to adapt it for yourself, and then eventually you will hopefully have a good code and you will have some background that will check functionality of your product.
Ну, можно сказать и так.
Yeah, you could say that.
Ну, тут сложнее, тут уже этим должен заниматься менеджмент и
It's up to management.
сказать, что, ребята, вы должны писать тесты, поскольку вам за
They're
это
the ones
платят
who should
деньги.
tell you that you should be writing tests because you're
Написание
getting
фреймворка
paid
это
for
уже
it, and writing a framework is secondary to that. Thank you very much for your presentation. I also have a question regarding balancing. The first step that you mentioned, once refactoring has been completed, the code has become simpler. On the other hand, there's many more dependencies and classes. So, from my perspective, it got lighter on one hand, but heavier on the other. And you have to review the code of your colleagues. And sometimes it's easier for me to look at the junior code because the mechanics is easier to follow. So, how can we strike a balance? Typically, it takes experience.
В каждом тесте полностью расписаны все шаги воспроизведения, то есть все драйверы, файлы и так далее. И когда у тебя меняется верстка, даже там кнопки входа на сайт, тебе нужно это править в 400 тестах,
change the entry button, and you have to make a correction at 400 locations, then you realize that you need to set up classes, locations, and so on. Like I said, in my experience, it took a lot of getting used to, but as my experience and confidence grew, I knew how to make it faster and easier. I Googled it. So again, you just have to learn it by doing it. Tia is going to go to Barcamp asking that question about the balance. I'm Helen. I also have a question about balance. How can you achieve optimality in such a test so that it would look not only at the entry and exit, but the full process?
Ну, смотрите, суть теста в любом случае у вас какая-то конкретная
идея,
что-то проверить.
Если у вас есть какие-то промежуточные
шаги для этого всего, ну, грубо говоря, вам нужно проверить оплату, да? Если для этого нужно сделать еще, там, зарегистрировать нового пользователя,
and if you need to register another user on top of his account and so on, all these things need to be sacrificed for API query. You're going to check one thing
Предполагайте, что есть
and one
какой-то
thing
там
alone.
end-to-end тест, и в нем
If
можно
there is an
напихать
end-to-end
каких-то, ну,
test and you
условно,
can
там, 20 проверок,
stuff it with 20 subtests,
решение имеет место быть.
well, of
Но
course,
это
it's a
очень
possible
хрупкое.
solution, but it's a
Уж очень. И
flaky,
вот балансы какой-то
highly
найти, если,
flaky test.
как сказать, если у вас
I know
основная
how to
идея
put
теста
it.
проверить
If the key
покупку,
purpose
все
is to
остальные
test
подготовительные
if
какие-то
purchase
шаги,
has been
данные,
made,
это все это
then
можно сделать
any
с помощью
other
генерации каким-то скриптом,
preliminary
API
test
запросом или
could be
с базы, как это
checked
все выглядит.
via
Но это
API
будет то, что не
query
нужно в самом тесте.
or
Так или
looking through
иначе,
the
вы здесь
database.
основную идею
One
Да,
way or
дальше
another, you
представите.
need to identify the key idea and then proceed
Всем
to
спасибо за
separate
вопросы,
Thank you for your
спасибо за доклад.
questions.
У нас
Thank you
время
for
вышло.
your
Я думаю, докладчик будет рад
interaction.
пообщаться
Time is up. I'm sure the speaker will be
на
happy
баркемпе
to
или
engage with
в
you
холле.
at the bar
И
camp
у
or
нас
in the lobby,
осталось
but don't
последний
forget,
пункт, это
there is one
футболочка
other thing,
за
and that
лучший
is
вопрос.
handing out a T-shirt. There's a person in the first row.
Всем спасибо.
Thanks, everyone.